Good morning. I hate to call this session to order. There's so much energy in the room this morning, but we have a full agenda and a lot to cover. I'm Jan Strassfeld, Executive Director of the Youngstown Foundation and a sponsor for this morning's event. Joining those duties with the Wien Foundation, the Trumbull 100, and the Community Foundation of Western Pennsylvania and Northeastern Ohio. So what really matters to metros, especially in the post-recession economy? Jobs, education, innovation, all of the above or none of the above? It's an important question and one that the Fund for Our Economic Future has been working to answer. Just a few weeks ago, What Matters to Metros, Foundational Indicators for Economic Competitiveness, was released by the Fund. Research identifying factors associated with metropolitan growth in 115 mid-size metropolitan areas in post-recession economies. This morning, we are privileged to have the opportunity to learn more about these factors and the specific implications for the Mahoning Valley. Our agenda for today includes presentation of the research followed by a question and answer session, an overview of the region's roadmap project and its focus on a more competitive economy, and we'll conclude with a panel discussion to explore different perspectives on how to advance a growing opportunity-rich economy for the residents of the Mahoning Valley. Before I introduce our presenters, I'd like to introduce a few special people in the audience, not that you all aren't special. Some of our elected officials and their representatives. We welcome Sarah Lowry, Northeast Ohio Regional Representative for U.S. Senator Sherrod Brown. We have John McNally, Youngstown mayoral candidate and previous Mahoning County Commissioner. And I see Demaine Kitchen, Chief of Staff, City of Youngstown, and Youngstown mayoral candidate. We appreciate you all being here. I would also be remiss if I didn't take a second to thank some people that helped to put this program together. Terry Ewell from the Ewell Company, from the Ewell Group, and from the Fund for Our Economic Future, Karen Mazenter and Chris Thompson. Thanks to all of you for your help this past week. Presenting the research on behalf of the Fund for Our Economic Future are Brad Whitehead and Emily Garb-Pichetti. Brad is president of the Fund for Our Economic Future, a collaboration of philanthropy that advances a growing opportunity-rich economy for the people of Northeast Ohio. He has been a leader of the fund since its formation in 2004 and was named its first president in 2006. Brad previously was program director for economic development at the Cleveland Foundation and was a director at the international management consulting firm McKinsey & Company. He did his undergraduate work at Harvard in economics and anthropology and completed his master's at Harvard's Kennedy School for Government and Environmental Economics. And I understand he was part of the heavyweight crew team. Emily is manager of research, grants, and evaluation for the fund and is the principal author of the What Matters to Metros report. Before joining the fund, Emily worked at the Brookings Institution. She did her undergraduate work at Emerson College and received her master's degree in urban studies and spatial economics in Mexico City. We're going to let Brad start things off.
Thank you. You must be a rower if you mentioned the heavyweight crew thing. Good morning, everyone, and thanks for the introduction. I'm actually not going to be doing any of the presentation of the thing today. My job is just to tee up the materials by Emily and then to provide a little bit of context of, well, who is the fund and why is it that we're doing that? And I see many of our friends here in the Mahoning Valley, so I think many of you are already familiar with the Fund for Our Economic Future and what it is we do. But for those of you who are not, the fund is the philanthropic community in Northeast Ohio's response to the long-term economic issues and challenges that we face in Northeast Ohio. And we're comprised of some 54 different philanthropic entities that came together about a decade ago and said that if we're going to achieve our respective philanthropic missions, whether that be arts and culture, education, health, you name it, we need to have a healthy and vibrant economy. And so that's why it is we came together. And we really do represent the breadth of the region, stretching from Lorain County down into Wayne County and Ashland, and over to Ashtabula and through the valley into Stark County. And we count, thankfully, as our members, the Wien Foundation, the Trumbull 100, the Community Foundation of Western Pennsylvania and Eastern Ohio, and we've enjoyed the participation and involvement of the Mahoning Community Foundation, the Community Foundation of Mahoning Valley. Really what we're about is trying to get the local connected to the regional, with the proposition that really we're going to struggle to compete on a global stage if we try to all do that by ourselves. University of Akron is a great place. Oberlin College is a great place. Youngstown State University is a great place. But each of us individually isn't enough to really accomplish the things that we need to accomplish. And the way we will make things work is by creating stone soup. Remember the old parable of stone soup, which is that if we all bring a little something to the equation, we can do great things. And that's what this is really about. It's our understanding that 90% of the action has to occur at the local level, but what we're trying to do is to see where and how the local can connect to the regional in order to do great things. And the example I'll use on this one, I think that worked, is an example that is playing out right here in the Mahoning Valley that we're very proud to have been a part of, which is the Additive Manufacturing Innovation Institute. Frankly, you'll recall that there was no way that we were supposed to win that. Right? There was no way. That thing was going, I think it was supposed to go to upstate New York or some such thing, and if it was going to go to Ohio, it was definitely going to go to Columbus. But when you start putting together the capabilities that were assembled here, whether it was the liquid crystal technology at Kent, with the roll-to-roll polymer processing at Akron, with the sensor technology at Lorain County Community College, with the workforce programs that you have here in the Valley, suddenly we had a bunch of welterweights who were fighting way above our weight class and ended up winning this thing for the first time. And that's the kind of story that we hope keeps repeating. As I said, we've been proud of the partnership that we've had in the Valley. You often don't hear our name, but hopefully you're hearing the names of the people that are actually driving the work, and we're glad to have supported that. So, you know, we've tried to do some behind-the-scenes support around the T-Bike, the Tech Belt Energy Innovation Center. We've been working, I saw Bill Miller and Dan Mamula, and Hunter Morrison here with the NEOSCC, which is looking at how do we connect land use to economic development, to housing issues and so forth. We're proud of the connection that we've had with Jumpstart, who's worked with Jim Kostler in the Youngstown Business Incubator and so forth. We're very proud to have helped brought dollars to the Mahoning Valley on the Work Advance initiative that the Compass organization is unfolding in the manufacturing space and so forth. And so these are all examples, hopefully, of where again, the local can connect with the regional, and we really have some terrific stone soup. So our goal, really the foundation of today, is predicated on three pretty simple ideas, which is that for us to make a fundamental transformational change in our economic trajectory, a couple things need to happen. First is we have to focus in on what matters. You know, the curious thing about economic development is that there are plenty of theories and fads and such of what's going on, but too often the dollars run to the idea du jour. And so since our inception, we said we're going to try not to be enamored with the idea of the day. Instead, we're going to try to have a firm analytic underpinning for where we place our resources. And so hence this body of research to try to ferret out what really matters to the long-term success of an economy. The second is this idea that there needs to be the local to regional alignment, as we said. But then that gets to the third, is to have that local regional alignment, and for us to make progress, we need to have a common understanding of the facts of the situation. Because if we've got a group sitting over in Akron that thinks the real problem is X, and we're sitting here today in the valley and we see the situation as Y, we're never going to come up with a sense of where our alignment really exists. And so, part of the spirit of today is to see whether we can start seeing the situation similarly, and then that allows us to kind of formulate action. So that's the goal. What we're going to do today here at the Fund is we want to listen very carefully to the conversation that you have for what this means to the Valley, so that we can not only take that back to inform our work at the regional level, but then as we go to Canton and Akron and Lorain and elsewhere, to take the messages here to see if we can in fact start getting that common message. And then we're also hopeful then that this starts informing as well your own work on things like the Roadmap Project and all the many other wonderful things that are going here, and that it might just shine a little more light on some of the things going. Let me finally close my piece by saying we've greatly appreciated the partnership that we've had in developing this work with Paul Cabot and the folks at the Federal Reserve Bank, as well as the heavy lifting, both analytically and intellectually, by Cleveland State University. And we have Marissa Piazza and Renia Lendl, and I don't see Ziona Austrian here today, but Cleveland State really drove a great deal of this analytic work, and fortunately we have a couple of the researchers here if the questions get really hard. So with that, Emily, you were already introduced, so why don't I turn it over to you and we'll go through the materials. Thanks.
All right. Good morning, everybody. Thank you, Brad. Thank you, Jan. I want to start off just by saying that we wouldn't be here today if we really didn't think this research was relevant and timely to the work you're all doing as we kind of move forward out of this recovery. So that's really what this about that's really what this is about, is what can we do to capitalize on this recovery and make it a long-lasting one. The purpose of What Matters to Metros is to understand what factors are associated with growing resilient economies and how those economies might differ today than they did 10 or 20 years ago. So as Brad, okay. Genius. Okay. All right. So as Brad mentioned, we're a collaboration of, can you all hear me okay? Okay. We're a collaboration of over 50 philanthropic organizations from across a 16-county region throughout Northeast Ohio. And we're dedicated to promoting a regional economic competitiveness agenda. And these are some of those economic development organizations and partners that we have in the work that help us take our ideas and investments and make them a reality. A lot of them you'll recognize here. The idea behind our investments is that, as Brad said, they are informed by research. And we have been doing this since 2006. The first white paper was released by the Federal Reserve Bank of Cleveland in partnership with the fund to figure out what really matters to the economy. And we've since used it more as a dashboard to kind of track ourselves on those indicators like poverty and education year to year. Some of those indicators, as many of you might know, don't move a whole lot. So if you're looking at inequality or bachelor's degrees, you're not going to see a lot of movement. And we really tried to reframe the discussion this year to one about what matters in a post-recession economy. Are we tracking ourselves on the right indicators? And that's what we come up with here. This report was released on May 2nd, and we've kind of been going out talking to folks around the region to make sure everybody understands what's in it. We looked at a lot of different data that I'll talk about in just a second. Okay, the three main findings, and I'll come back to these, but I don't want you to be holding your breath too long. So the first is that education and innovation are more interconnected than we have seen them before. The second is that the places that have the high self-employment rates and the high business starts tend to be the more integrated and diverse metropolitan areas. Racially integrated, racially diverse metropolitan areas. And the third, and this is the most sobering finding that I think we're going to spend a little more time on, is that the places we saw grow the most across the US, the metropolitan areas that we saw grow the most in terms of just jobs, just sheer jobs, were in 2010 the most unequal, poorest metros in the country. All right, so let's backtrack a little bit. Where do we come from? This is the Northeast Ohio economic performance since the 90s, but if you go back even to the late 70s, we have traditionally underperformed the national economy. So you can see the US right here in the blue and Northeast Ohio average in the red. And there's only a couple instances, one in the early 90s, where we really, coming out of that early 90s recession, we outperformed the national economy. We were doing well, but then what happened? We dropped back down. In this recovery, what's happening? We're actually picking up speed again. We're outperforming the national economy on 3 measures: output, productivity, and per capita income. And I just wanted to note that these are for Northeast Ohio, but if you just looked at the Youngstown metropolitan area, its output would be 4%. So the question to us and why we did this research was really, okay, we're doing great. How do we sustain that recovery? How do we take it to the next level so we're not going to drop back down again in 1 or 2 years? How do we capitalize on this opportunity? So I'm going to take you through a little of the methodology, but not get too deep, just highlight a few things. We looked at 115 metropolitan areas from across the country. It represents a sample of about 38% of the US population. Of course, after looking at the US, we care about Northeast Ohio the most, and we looked at metropolitan areas ranging from around 400,000, which is roughly the size of Canton, to Cleveland, which is roughly a little over 2 million, to places like San Diego and Seattle, which is upwards of 3.5 million. And again, that's 166 billion in metropolitan product and about 4 million in population is Northeast Ohio. So then we took all that, all the data from 115 metros, and we looked at 55 variables for each one of those metros. We looked at bachelor degrees, income inequality, BA degrees. We looked at broadband, vacant housing, tech transfer. We looked at all of them, and they grouped into 6 factors. Those 6 factors represented 71% of the variation from metro to metro, but only 3 represent 50% of the variation. So these are the 3 we're going to focus on today. They're the ones we focused on in the report. So what matters out of all those things in the economy? Well, we care not only how they matter to jobs or how they matter to GDP, but all 4 of these measures. GMP, which is gross metropolitan product, that's the total output of the economy. Jobs, per capita income, and productivity, which is total output per employee. So then, to understand how each one of these factors related to each one of those growth measures, I'm going to take you through a little chart. So you'll see, just for the factor of education and innovation, it is positively associated with GMP, no association positive or negative with jobs, and then you'll see its positive association with per capita income and productivity. When we take a deeper dive into education and innovation, I just want to remind everyone that this is a composite factor of many different component variables, some of which are here: advanced degrees, tech transfer, STEM occupations, patents, bachelor's degrees. This is the type of stuff we're looking at in this factor. So you'll see on the map the places in darker green generally scored higher. An example of one of those metros is Durham, Chapel Hill. A lot of the metros that scored the highest on this factor of education and innovation had those anchor institutions like universities and hospital systems that were really strong, that are engines of the economy in these places. Now, in Northeast Ohio, particularly in Youngstown, didn't do so well on this factor. I believe it was 110 out of 115. But that's not to say there is not tremendous opportunity right here in the region. And I just highlight a few of those initiatives here. Obviously, the National Additive Manufacturing Innovation Institute, T-Bike, the Tech Belt, Youngstown State University, and then some of those grantees we talked about, Nortech, BioEnterprise doing their thing. It just creates tremendous opportunity for the region. So this is not to say, yes, Youngstown ranks fairly low in this indicator, but there is a lot of room for scaling up these initiatives. So that's education innovation. We're going to move on to entrepreneurship and inclusion, and you'll see that things like business starts, self-employment, entrepreneurship are associated with every measure of growth, GMP, jobs, per capita income, and productivity. So some of those variables that make up this factor of entrepreneurship and inclusion: foreign-born, high percentage of foreign-born, low African-American segregation, self-employment, establishment birth rates. These things group together. So they're unlikely pairs, right? Usually people talk about inclusion and they talk about entrepreneurship. Actually, they tended to move together from metro to metro. So this is one kind of interesting aspect of the research that I wanted to point out. With this, though, comes this complexity. What are we talking about when we say entrepreneurship? And I want to point out that we're talking about those small mom and pop shops that are generally population serving industries like your salons, your grocery stores, your car wash places. But you're also talking about kind of those high-tech entrepreneurs. This is secondarily associated with patents, for example. So we know that there's distinct tendencies in different metropolitan areas. Makes it all the more important to understand these for what they are in the individual metropolitan area. An example is Austin, Texas, hotbed for kind of new startups. They got the university there. They scored really high in this indicator. In Northeast Ohio, generally fairly lower, again, similar to education and innovation, but we have so many things going on here that really drive the potential for some of these entrepreneurs to scale up. So moving on to the last one, that if you'll recall, we said that the higher growth metros tended to be the most unequal, and this is the indicator where we saw that play out. It's called economic polarization, and while we saw that so this factor, which is made up of things like inequality, poverty, low-income populations, crime, this indicator was positively associated with job growth, but it was negatively associated with per capita income growth. I'm going to go a little more into this one. Here's the map. You'll see some of these variables I just put up there that I mentioned: inequality, crime, poverty rates, low health insurance, for example. If you just looked at, let's say, McAllen, Texas, so if you just looked at job growth, in over 2 decades, they increased jobs by 109%. You're thinking, great, wow, they're really making some progress. Then you look over here. This is the composite indicator of economic polarization, which is all those things I mentioned: crime, poverty, low-income populations. They also scored the highest there. An example, Las Vegas. Yeah, it looked like a great economy, but then we had the housing crisis. We realized the boom and bust economy weren't the most sustainable economies. So there's your poster child. And then you look at some of the metros that were able to balance this what we're calling a growth and opportunity agenda. So they did see, there were some places that did see job growth, and they also, their inequality wasn't exacerbated. So we're like, oh, what did they do there? The thing is, there weren't many metros. Denver was one of the few metros that did see job growth and didn't see an increase in their inequality. Good transportation system, generally good connections between the suburbs and the inner cities, generally a healthier economy. Northeast Ohio, we have a traditionally strong middle class. We fared, fairly well in this indicator, but recognizing that if we just looked at job growth, inequality is a concern. sorry, I want to go back to that one because I forgot to mention, there's all these great initiatives. So we talk about, well, what do you mean by that, Emily? Like, what's a sustainable job? How do you identify one of those? And it's a job where you come into your workplace, and just because you're lower skilled means you're destined for a 6-week job that pays $7 to $8 an hour. No, there's initiatives underway, and I wanted to point out Work Advance is teaming up with our local partner Towards Employment in the Mahoning Valley and in Cuyahoga County, so that low to mid-skill level workers really have an opportunity to advance along a career path and learn new skills that are skills that can be matched with employer needs for long-term gain. So that's really what we're talking about. When we talk about the implications of this, we're not just saying jobs aren't important, we're saying good jobs are important. Okay, and I'm just going to end on this quote from Joe Stiglitz. We typically talk about rising inequality and the sluggish recovery as separate phenomena when they are in fact intertwined. Inequality stifles, restrains, and holds back our growth. So as we see our economy finally picking up, I think this is really where we want to focus in on is sustaining that growth for the long term. And that's really why I'm here today, to talk about how metropolitan areas can keep building on our recovery. The fact is we are outperforming the nation, and we want to stay there. Okay, so I'm going to hand it back over to Jan, I think, and I'll take some questions.
Well, first of all, thank you, Emily, for that wealth of information. I think we all have a lot to, don't go anywhere. All have a lot to process, but this is the opportunity for you to dig in a little deeper and get better clarification on some of the broader things that were presented, and take advantage of Emily's resources as well as those people from Cleveland State that were part of the collaboration. So what I ask is, when you get up to ask a question, please introduce yourself and let us know who you represent. Okay.
Youngstown. It was so interesting. Any questions? Can be anything. Yeah.
Now, who are you?
Oh, sorry. Sarah Lown from West Reserve. You distilled the, you distilled the factors down from the 55 to the 6, and then from there to 3, arguing that 50% of the drivers in the economy come down to those 3 factors, including the polarization. Why did you select those 3 factors instead of staying with the 6? What was the underlying logic to that?
That's a great question, and I think cause for a lot of confusion. So those factors are actually made up of all those variables. So we didn't select anything. We conducted a factor analysis. So, and this is why this research is a little different from just the dashboards that you see, where people choose which indicators they want to track themselves on and they go do it. This actually tells you, when we looked at all the metropolitan areas, these were the different variables that moved together from metro to metro. So within, for example, education and innovation, you saw patents and tech transfer and advanced degrees move together. So we say that explained that metro economy. So it's a statistical, I'm happy to get into it more, but the idea is that education and innovation was 16 variables, and then you saw another economic, I think, entrepreneurship and inclusion that was made up of 6 variables. So they're not separate variables, they're component pieces. And I don't know if you need more explanation than that.
I think it's worth probably also talking about, well, if they bundled into 6, why did we go with the 3? But
right.
I do want to make sure that idea that if you say, well, a bachelor's education and a master's education and high school graduation, you'd say, well, those are 3 different variables, but they move so closely together and they have the same explanatory capabilities, so they get bundled together. So that's why these factors are these groups of things that move together. which was what was so strange in a couple of them when we said entrepreneurship moved with all these things that had to do with a fair and equal society, which was very curious. But it was these groupings, and then we had these six groupings that moved together, and well, my shorthand is we chose the three because they explained most of it. The other three were really interesting and important as well, but it was for ease of communication. You might just briefly talk about the other three.
Sure. So we also looked at business costs. We looked at connectivity, which was things like domestic air travel and air quality. We also, I'm blanking out on the sixth one right now. But these are also mentioned in the report, but they didn't explain as much of the variation. So altogether, all the variables we looked at explained 71% of the economy, not 100%, 71%. And then, but there were specifically 3 of them that explained 50. So we wanted to focus in on those 3. And I just a note, if this doesn't come up later and you don't go home and read every word of that 2-pager that's in front of you, what's great about this is that we made all the data available. So if you want to look at the tax cost index or the energy cost index or obesity or healthcare insurance or poverty rates, all that data is available to you free online in downloadable format, easy to access, and it's all on our website. Yeah.
Did you make any effort, or are you able to differentiate between Youngstown, Warren, Akron, Canton, Cleveland, within the Northeast Ohio sector?
Yeah, and we did a little bit of that. If you look on the 2-pager that was provided to you, we did a couple overall rankings, just how they fared on the different factor groups. So when I said Youngstown, and I could be wrong, so you guys will correct me, but when I said Youngstown was 110 and, there's my boss is so good. Okay, so when I said education and innovation, I was right. Yay. So Youngstown ranked 110 out of 115. So you're able to see for each of the 115 metropolitan areas, the data is available for each metro. But like Brad said, I think it's important for us in Northeast Ohio, when we look at ourselves as a region, how do we align on these certain indicators, and how do we create a kind of unified, coherent agenda around, where we should be going, where we are, and where we can go.
The takeaway for me on that as well is there are some really important differences across our region, but we're a lot more alike than we are different.
Dale Forrester, Star Manufacturing, and also Mahoning Valley Manufacturing Coalition. How old, this is a 2-part question.
Yeah.
How old is the data that you use? And I am of the narrow-minded, possibly opinion that we're kind of in a watershed. Do you think that as some of the non-college educated jobs, that those increase, do you think that's going to change any of the data or statistics or trends? Because I think what we're seeing is the need for this middle ground training in between college and no college. It's a high-tech training, but it's not necessarily college. There may be some college credit, which we're working for as well, but it may not be the degrees and the kind of degrees, the academia that we're accustomed to calling higher education. Do you think that's going to change? And do you think this data reflected any of that change that's happening?
Yes and no. It's always a good, for really good questions, that always seems to be the answer. And I say that because we did look at that one factor that was called education and innovation, and that really focused on the higher tier, the higher skill level. But then we also saw through the other factors how important it is to connect in lower skilled populations. So while and that's going to get you your job growth, your business growth, your GMP growth. You'll notice that for education and innovation, that doesn't get you your job growth. So if you're trying to grow jobs in a region, your only job creation strategy shouldn't be education, right? It's not your be-all, end-all answer. Although we did see the advantages of it and how how strong the economies were that had those advanced degrees. So we also saw the other side of the picture, which is how important it is to have kind of a shared growth where not just one segment, one tiny segment of your population is benefiting. I don't know.
I'd like to just pick up on this one as well, because it's a really central issue. In some other economic research that we have done in collaboration with the business community, it looks like we could be facing a workforce shortage in the next 10 years of some 70,000 workers. And interestingly enough, it's roughly divided between highly skilled and then, just as you were pointing out here, these mid-skilled workers. And I think we have somebody from Compass here today as well. It would be good to hear a bit about this, because we need to address this as well, because we have this tremendous mismatch then of having a lot of people out there that aren't even prepared yet for these mid-skilled jobs. You know, a decade ago, we thought we were moving to the post-industrial, post-manufacturing society, and we very much learned that no, manufacturing and industry is very much in our future, but we do have this mismatch in skills alignment. I'd be curious if you, from the Compass perspective, this idea, how do we get traditionally low-skilled able to take these mid-skilled jobs, even if it's not kind of at the super high levels of training, you know, from the subject?
Well, what we've seen with people moving into the mid-level and even in the low-skilled jobs and then moving up the career ladder is that, you know, transportation has been an issue to get there, but from an educational standpoint, that the career technical centers in our community have done a great job in putting together training and certifications that meet the employers and meeting the employers' needs for those individuals to get the training and to attain those jobs. And then the individuals that may be in that current mid-level job may be also accelerating up with an advanced degree to take that job. So we're backfilling positions, but then creating opportunities for employers then to have a good stream of human resources to fill those gaps. But we still see a big gap there in getting people into the training and accessible to be ready for that workforce.
I just want to add one thing, and that is that this is generally a level-setting exercise, right? So not every metro should have the same goals for, we should have X number of advanced degrees and therefore a successful economy, but each of our metropolitan areas play differently into these sectors. And I think to understand where our competitive advantages lie, if we do have a workforce gap, then how do we fill it is really important. Not all metros might have that issue.
Emily, a number of us in the room have been involved the last couple of years on the Sustainable Communities Consortium, which is more of a physical.
Can you introduce yourself to those who don't know?
A number of us have been involved in a consortium which is largely a land use, land-based, place-based strategy examination. What implications do you tease out of this work that might instruct our work as we go forward? Look at options, particularly in the Mahoning Valley, where we've got brownfield, we've got connectivity issues that were raised, we've got land use issues around vacant property. What can we tease out of this that might give us guidance?
Brad, did you want to take this one? Or? Okay. We did look, I mean, there's a lot of land use indicators that we could have looked at that we didn't, but we did look at a few that are really, right, everything's related to land use. Job connectivity and workforce and, wow, taxes and business development, and you could go on and on, environment. So one of the places where I think it came up in our discussions, but there's probably a lot of offshoot discussions that could be had, was in this question of the tax base. So we did see really high business costs related to Northeast Ohio for a number of different reasons, and they generally clumped in terms of states and state tax policies. But we also recognize that, similar to what you're finding from your research now, one of the reasons why our taxes are so high is because of our infrastructure costs. And for people to begin to make that connection, that doesn't necessarily make us a more competitive economy just because we build another 5 roads, I think is an important thing to look at. I'm not saying that our research concludes anything. Again, this is meant to be a platform to for discussions to set the table and dive deeper into some of these indicators. But that did come up, and I think it's a really important point that we do have higher taxes, but to understand why we have higher taxes is a key question. Add anything?
No, I just wondered if Hunter wants to add anything to that based upon business as usual research.
Would you like to add anything based on the business as usual model?
Well, again, a number of you have been involved in our effort to look at what business as usual is. The broad economic projections suggest that the population of the region as a whole, 12 counties that we're looking at, isn't going to grow very much. The economy in terms of jobs is not going to grow very much, but we're continuing to spread out. And so the basic equation is that we're growing our footprint but not growing our population or our job base, leaving behind large areas. It winds up being a fundamental supply-demand issue that plays out very severely in places like the Mohawk Valley, but it's playing out in each and every community. And the cost burden at both ends of maintaining and recycling or repurposing can be abandoned property, and then providing services to the edge adds to the aggregate tax burden. Also pulls people further away from jobs. I was telling Brad earlier, one of our research pieces pursuant to looking at options is to look at where we have vacant property and where we have high quality public transit. About 8,000 acres that we've identified within 1,200 feet of the high quality transit lines in each community, such as Market Street in Youngstown. We abandon the land, we have the transit. Should we be looking at those places where you can put jobs, where people might actually be able to get to the jobs close by? It has a lot of information. We're also out around the region this week with the assessment of impediments to fair housing choice. A lot of that is a fairly technical piece of work for entitlement communities that receive block grant funds. But a couple of things we asked our consultants to do as we looked at 12 counties, and that's to look at where we're subsidizing jobs. Surprise, surprise, a lot of the SBA jobs are going out into the urbanizing communities far, far away from transit lines. We're leaving jobs and people behind. So one of the things we want to push at from our perspective is how do we bring jobs and people closer together? The physical connectivity winds up being important, and how you use place-based strategies such as we're calling quality connected places, like downtown Youngstown, like the role that the incubator has played in creating a place of intellectual churn with the university. That may be a regional strategy. So these are some of the things we're teasing out. And again, it's very important to try to connect this factor analysis, which is largely a-spatial, with what you do in community on the ground that makes things different.
Right. Thanks, Hunter. Yes.
Sharon, we're in the city of Youngstown, economic development. My question is, in terms of this research, what the overall objective is. Is it to educate the region of indicators that we should be looking at? Are there next steps to say, for you to convene think tanks or working groups to try to share ideas to see how some of those can be looked at on a regional level?
So there's a number of different ways I could answer this, but let's start with the original, like, let's go back 5 years. Why did the fund begin conducting this research? And it was to inform our own grant making. So we have put out or leveraged over $100 million over the past 10 years. And we want to make sure that money is going to places who really, that not places, but we want to make sure that money is invested wisely for the long-term competitiveness of the region. So that's one kind of very the fund is doing it for our own gain. But at the same time, I think we've realized that the importance of getting this out into the community, and earlier, also in a past iteration, some of you might remember Voices and Choices. I wasn't around, but that was also an effort to see what was important. This is what the research says, but what's important to you all out in the community. As we go forward with this specific report that was released on May 2nd, and we talked to communities about it, our objective is to make sure that this is shared information and that it's not kept on a shelf but actually used. And we realize that we at the fund are a really tiny piece of reality. And you guys are the ones that really use it and can put this stuff to good use in your day-to-day work. So that's our intention, is for us to go out, share the information, continue the conversation. This is not meant to be a one-month conversation. We do have it as kind of a theme of ours, I think, over the next couple of years, to really reinforce this research in everything we do. There's an online discussion at the Civic Commons. The link is on your paper. And then ideally, this would inform a broader policy discussion as well at the local and at the national level. And we're developing that over the next couple of months. So we welcome you all to be part of that conversation. Then, of course, we hope you use it in your own work.
You know, it's a little quick for you all to process this and what your takeaways and that sort of thing, and you'll sit and reflect on that. There's two big takeaways that I know we've had that maybe you'll have as well. One is, for the last decade, we at the fund have been praying simultaneously to the gods of jobs and the gods of income. And we kind of thought about that as the same. You know, where you have jobs, you have income. And at least for us, it was a startling finding to realize that what's associated with those two things may be different. And the takeaway from that is that jobs, jobs, jobs may not be the rallying cry that we need in our work. It may be good jobs, good jobs, good jobs. And that any job should just be a bridge to good jobs, as opposed to any job is the goal in and of itself. And then the second, which is very much on our mind, is this idea of the growth that we're starting to achieve now may be slowed down or impeded if we don't adjust the equity issues. And that was that quote from the Nobel economist Joe Stiglitz at the very end that says that, look, poverty and opportunity is a good in and of itself, but it's also highly associated with the ability to sustain economic growth. And a conversation we're having internally here, and if it resonates with you, well, it seems like it's a conversation you've been having in the Valley a lot longer than elsewhere, but that there's this world of growth players, the chambers and the entrepreneurial community and so forth. And then there's this world of opportunity players, the people who are worried about social service and justice and patterns of development. And never the two shall meet. And we have to somehow link the growth and opportunity worlds to say these are just two sides of the same coin, and how can we find a way to move these agendas together? And what that means, I'm not really sure yet, but it starts by getting the growth community and the opportunity community coming together to hash that out.
A couple more questions, and then I just want to note that that question is going to be really important, I think, for our panelists, as far as how they see their own work play out and the implications of this research on their day-to-day jobs. Yeah.
My name is Chris Travers. I'm a sort of a grassroots leader in a grassroots world and with a number of different organizations. And in the interest of full disclosure, I'm also a candidate for Youngstown president of City Council. I'm not surprised about job creation without income generation. I'm not surprised with that part, but I'm curious about one thing. Did your research were you able to identify any specific industries, where that low-wage job growth occurred? And I'm interested in seeing, if there's any common denominator, among those metro areas where you saw that data revealed.
That's a terrific question. We've done that at a regional level. We haven't done that at a metropolitan level in terms of industry by industry breakouts and wages. And it wasn't as part of this analysis. So what's great about kind of kicking off the conversation with this report is that it's so big and there's so many different things you could do with it and there's so much data. I think over the next couple years, we're going to continue to ask those questions about which jobs are those jobs. We know that in healthcare, we see projected employment grow, but the bigger part of our output measures, like GMP, are really going to come from things like advanced manufacturing in this region. So those understanding kind of the wage trends that are occurring with that, good wages in manufacturing, but we won't have as many jobs as we traditionally expected. I think these are going to be important things to tease out.
Keep hammering with the questions, but I'm interested, and there's so much interesting data here, and it goes back to Hunter's observation about the growing footprint. Is the data elastic enough that we could look at connectivity issues and polarization and find correlations there? Because I think what Hunter's talking about may have something to do with polarization, but I don't have any data to back that up, and that's important to our region.
Yeah. There's, depends what you mean by polarization, but yeah, you can take any number of variables and the data's all there and you can run those correlations. I know that the Brookings Institution did a great study last year on transit access, and so you can see, depending on where you live and where you work, what is the average commute time or what is the average distance commuted. All that data is there, and what this does is really hone in on what we should be looking at as opposed to what's fun to look at. What should we really be paying attention to, and that's one of those things.
One more question. As you were looking at your data, did you find from, you mentioned some cities that represented one particular indicator that they did well, did you find that there were a number that managed to do everything well, or did you see that one city would have this, another city with this, but very uncommon for there to be a good balance among all?
Yes, great question. And there were very few who were able to perform well, particularly on this factor of economic polarization, and get the entrepreneurship right, and get the innovation right, and get the education right. And so we did see this disparity. Places like Denver, I showed actually did grow jobs and it didn't exacerbate inequality. I would say the same for Madison, for Wisconsin, for Minneapolis, for Portland, Maine. There were a few that kind of stuck out, but it is hard. Like, it is not an easy thing. So when Brad talks about kind of this growth camp, and I think Jeff is going to talk about it later, growth and opportunity being so important, it's not an easy balance to get at. And we really didn't see a lot of metros who achieved it. Okay, I want to leave time for panelists, so if we don't have more questions, then let's get to the local stuff.
Emily, thank you again. Let's give her a round of applause.